Hello, everyone. We have the wonderful Kate Leiper here. I'm so excited to have Kate with us today. Hello, how are you?
Hi, Liv. I'm really well, thank you.
So, Kate is the creatress from her business called SensuAlchemy here on the Sunshine Coast. And I'm guessing that you also run that in the online space, Kate?
I do both online
Yeah.
and live workshops and things like that as well. Yeah,
And Kate is a psychotherapist and a feminine embodiment facilitator.
yeah, coach. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's really exciting to have Kate with us today because she shares with us some really interesting uh, insights and perspectives with working with grief. And it's something that we haven't really spoken a lot about, but I think a topic that is very, very important. So this is we do have a few men in our group.
Hmm.
This is predominantly for the women. However, there's no
Absolutely.
reason why husbands or partners wouldn't benefit from this if they felt and if there was a need, I'm sure.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, I have worked with men, and I just spoke at an event last week actually where it was both men and women, and the men really received it. So this is for everyone. Yeah.
Yes, beautiful. All right, so let's begin by Kate, if you want to share with this community tell us a little bit about yourself and the work that you do.
Oh, where to start? Okay. Thank you for having me, Liv. It is a pleasure, and this is one of my favorite things to talk about. Um, so, I am the founder of SensuAlchemy School, and it is a school of embodied grief and pleasure. And this work is, I was sharing with you just before we hit record, this work has kind of evolved over time. My background is as a teacher and as a psychotherapist, and I used to work very, I guess, more in a clinical way, mostly with women. And where I was deeply passionate about that work, I kind of hit a point after my second daughter. I have three daughters. All they're still pretty young. My eldest is 9. And
Mhm.
after my second daughter, and the very normal challenges of balancing work and mothering and being a wife and all of what is, I guess, expected of us, I really found myself doing my absolute best serving the women who would come to me for support, most of them pregnant or, very much perinatal stage. And I think it was kind of a wake up call for me in that where I felt I had all the training and I was a very capable therapist, there was this niggle in me that really I couldn't shake around the fact that I was finding life pretty overwhelming. I was trying to support women who were coming to me saying, I'm exhausted, I'm disconnected, um, I don't have a lot of pleasure. I feel like there's this huge shift in identity. I don't know how to manage that. And I am there with all my tools and intervention, but like I'm sitting there going, me too. Right. And I really recognized, I think, in that point after I'd been studying, I was really entrenched in academia for about 8 years. Although I've been a deeply creative woman majority of my life, I'd really kind of cut myself off from a lot of my inherent creativity, sensuality, my connection to my body and my body's wisdom. And I think that was really the point in which I was like, there's something big missing here.
Mm.
Um, and I'm sure I'm not alone in being a woman who is deeply devoted to supporting other women, and yet who really, there's a lot in which I really need to support myself. And for me, that initiated really the last 6 years of healing my relationship to my wholeness, my body, and really learning to cultivate intimacy with who I am below their neck. You know, I used to joke I was really just a talking head. I knew everything. I was like so organized and so had all the research, all the tools, but I was deeply, deeply disconnected to what was below my body. So, you know, as life does, life throws many, many, many curveballs. And along my journey in embodiment, somatic work, and coming home to myself, I've actually experienced a lot of grief, a lot of really tangled, complicated grief. And so my work has naturally moved into this space in which now I have developed a body of work through the SensuAlchemy school, which is ultimately about supporting primarily women, but again, this body of work supports men as well, to deprogram their relationship to grief, really come back to the body as a safe place in which they can forge intimacy with grief and become really fluent in the language of grief as it moves through their body. And the key has been in my work to resensitize to the body in ways that women can access pleasure. And as I was speaking to you, Liv, earlier, when I speak to pleasure, it is outside of the patriarchal constructs of what pleasure, you know, a lot of the time we jump to, oh, do you mean sex? You know, is this just about pleasure, sexual pleasure? And what I teach is actually a pathway back into resensitizing the body to access okayness, a sense of good, a sense of feeling alive in our through our senses, external and internal. And we can actually define that however we want. That's well outside of what we've been taught is the pleasure that we are allowed to have, maybe because of how we look, who we are. Are we worthy of pleasure? Have we worked our ass off this week? Can we now go and have a nice day on Saturday? You know, whether or not we deserve it. It doesn't matter what we're wearing or not wearing. It's not about us giving. It's actually about us learning to receive our own pleasure and be sourced and supported by that as we navigate loss. So I know that's a lot condensed for you, but that's really in a nutshell kind of the trajectory of my work and where it is today.
Yeah, it sounds very, very interesting. So one thing that I thought of as you were sharing all of that is what's some of the programming around grief? Because I thought people might actually not even realize that their mindset that they
You're
have
exactly right.
Programming that
absolutely. Yeah, and it's actually such a good question, because it can be so liberating to actually recognize that the way that we relate to grief and understand grief, it is actually within this box and this definition, a lot of which we've taught to pathologize. And, you know, there's a lot of stigma around, there's a lot of stigma around emotional expression and intensity as it is. I think you would agree, right? And so our culture isn't very comfortable with humans being fully human and expressing conflicting big emotion. And grief is a time of life when we experience not just profound kind of crises of loss, but actually those gradual losses that accumulate over life that sometimes we can't even articulate. Grief can send us into various mental and emotional health crises and situations. And so our culture likes to, when they can't understand it, whack labels You know, you are this, or you've been experiencing this kind of sadness or whatever for this period of time. Therefore, you are now chronic, or you are now this, or you now have a problem. And what we've lost touch with, or our ancestors used to prioritize as a way of being in community, as a way of honoring rites of passage, and as a way of honoring life, we used to actually come together, and we used to really have reverence for all of what grief is, right? Which is just, which a lot of it cannot be labeled or defined. And the irony about that is that every single human being is going to experience loss as a byproduct of being alive. And yet our culture doesn't want a bar of it. Our culture is about, let's be optimistic, let's be positive, let's move through these linear stages and phases and then say, yay, I'm out the other end. And grief actually doesn't work like that. So the programming that I'm talking about is that often we can feel a deep sense of shame if we're still holding on to loss, or if our loss and our, and I can talk a little bit more about this in a moment, but if the grief that we have been carrying due to a loss or multiple losses all tangled up together, if we kind of, we're convinced that we somehow have to fix it, or there's something wrong with us, we're broken, when actually that's not the truth. And I really deeply trust that when we can come into a different relationship to grief as a whole, so not just what it is we've lost, whether it's a loved one, a relationship, our health, connections of any kind, whatever it might be, a relationship to grief impacts how we move through grief and allow it to actually inform our lives in ways that support it to be even more rich and deep and meaningful. So yeah, there's a lot to it, and it's one of those things. Once we pull a thread, right, we start to actually go, wow, this has been impacting my life in so many ways.
Yeah, it's such a fascinating topic, grief. Just the conversations that I've had with different people that have come on so far. The one thing that's been really evident is how multi-dimensional it is. And of course, each one of us are a unique individual, so we're all going to have our own path. But I really love the language that you put around that, where we can, by working on that relationship that we have with grief, we can, we have this invitation then to allow the process.
Yes, and I like to emphasize that, because what I need people to understand, and what I think we have been, I think the issue with living in a culture that is very solution oriented, we want to fix things, we want to know what an outcome is, we want to have 6 sessions with a psychologist and believe that we'll be better. And when that doesn't happen, it's really can be quite challenging. Is that we've come to believe that we can heal grief. And I am so passionate. It sounds a little counterintuitive, but I'm actually very passionate about teaching and sharing this fundamental truth, is that grief cannot nor will not be healed. It's not it's not actually, it's not a disease. It's not something that can be fixed. What can be healed is your relationship to grief, to the grief, is how you show up in relationship to your heartbreak, your heartache, how in devotion you are or not to the sense of loss that you carry. And those who I work with, one of the number one things that they'll say is that understanding that in my bones has actually transformed everything. Because when we stop trying to fix something that actually isn't broken, we can actually begin to lean back and love ourselves in the grief and develop this dynamic devotional relationship to grief that is respectful and honoring, and can then begin to be integrated. And that's the part that we can heal. And that's got a lot to do, most to do, with unlearning those cultural conditions.
Yeah, it's definitely from the some of the women that I've interviewed so far are sort of therapists and practitioners, but they've also had a very deep personal journey with, in very, very intense grief. And what they all shared was that it's the journey through grief. On the other side of that, it's almost like you go through this awakening, an expanding, stretching kind of the soul.
Definitely.
You realign, and if you can, like you say, kind of deprogram that kind of closing down and avoidance of grief. Oh, I don't want to deal with that.
Yeah. Oh, definitely.
Yeah.
Definitely. And I feel like it is natural, or we have been taught to be afraid of that which feels overwhelming. And, we have labeled feelings good or bad. We're kind of taught that, like, we want to not be sad, we want to be happy. And so how do we get from sad to happy really, really quick? And again, it is really about understanding that there's no such thing as a good or a bad emotion. It's being human. And the more that we can welcome the entire spectrum of our human experience, the more space and, like you say, capacity we can build for joy, for pleasure. We actually, it's the nasty trick of it all, is that we actually can't have one without the other. So if we're avoiding feeling and allowing and making space for heartbreak, we are narrowing this path. We are narrowing our own embodied capacity. We can't just bypass that and expect to feel expansive and joyful and vital and free in our body. It just doesn't happen that way. We can't. It's a crappy truth, unfortunately. Being whole and being full and joyful has to also be welcoming of the shadows and the tough stuff.
Yeah, and it just made me think of even last night, the ways that we avoid, it was
so sophisticated too.
Yeah, so mine, as you were talking all about that, I realized, my way that I avoid without realizing that I'm avoiding is escapism.
Oh yeah, me too.
Yeah. I'm like, if I could just get out of this so if I could just run away and travel to that place.
Totally. Yeah, for sure. And I actually do think, our bodies and our brains are obviously, They're masterful. They can be so sophisticated. And I am of the school of thought that there is actually nothing wrong with cope, like with, if we know that that's what we do and we have an awareness over that, and it's like, you know what, I'm escaping. I am going to just do that for now. Like sometimes that's what we need to just forget about things. Absolutely. And we could do that that's right. We could do that in hundreds of ways. It's when we recognize, it's when it's a problem, becomes a problem, it's a problem, right? When we know that, I've started having wine every single night, wow, I've got about 10 items in 10 different carts online, and I'm spending hours scrolling to just imagine myself doing this or doing that, or whatever it might be. We've all got our vices, we've all got our ways. It's when we really notice that and we ask the question, what hurt is there that I'm just not prepared to feel? And sometimes we don't even know. Sometimes there's this compounding layer, or there's this just sense of, I'm not where I thought I'd be at this age. I'm not in the relationship I wanted to be, or I imagined it was going to be. It's not that you have to have had, as I said, this big catastrophe occur. Loss, incremental loss, or this loss of the ways we thought things should have been or should have gone, that can begin to really accumulate in a way that our bodies we don't know what to do with it. So we will numb out, and we will invest our energy in places that are away from that. And so the work that I do is not about throwing anyone in any deep end, because the body also doesn't work that way. Making these shifts into feeling is a process of desensitizing that starts with safety, that starts with us cultivating really deep sense of safety in our bodies, first and foremost, because a body wanting to fight or flee or freeze up is not a body in safety. And most of us will have those kind of nervous system responses. So that's where I start every time, with every single person I work with, every single program, everything. And that takes a little bit of time, but it is so worth it, because we can then begin to feel and move through these things and feel the pleasure and the joy.
Yeah, so I suppose this is where we really, that we start to open up now into that journey, using pleasure and recognizing pleasure to help us build on that relationship with the body as a resource. To move through it. It sounds amazing.
Yeah, that's right. And one thing just to add to that is that I think another belief that many of us have, particularly when it comes to grief work, or even particularly trauma work, I do kind of lots of somatic integration work through the nervous system as well with trauma. And, research has really shown in recent times that we don't actually have to dive into the depths of our trauma to then come back out and then access pleasure, right? But we have this idea that, oh my God, life is hard or heavy, or this has happened, so therefore I need to go into this intensive trauma therapy or move through all of this past wounding. Research has really shown that if we can learn, and their skills and a different, I guess, frame, in order to orient towards what feels good without even going to those depths, I mean, sometimes that can be really helpful, but actually learning to orient towards pleasure and get curious about what feels good, and really allow that to develop is really, really effective on its own. So a lot of the time it's like we're doing grief work, but actually we're doing pleasure work. And the grief stuff kind of comes up to meet our body when it feels safe and in a place that it can handle it. So I think that can be a relief to many as well. It's like, oh, I don't have to like, drudge through decades of tears and angst and all the rest. It's like, no, we can actually go in this way. There's another gateway, and it's actually through our bodies resourcing and orienting to pleasure, which is pretty incredible.
And so what's some of the ways that you do that in particular on your programs? Do you do it in the weave,
Grief weavers?
Grief weavers? Is this something?
Yeah, absolutely. So I use a lot of where sharing is very important, can be a really important mechanism for connection.
Yeah.
Particularly in a program like Grief Weavers, it's 4 weeks. So it's only, it's a reasonably short kind of introductory container. But yes, it is a space in which we come together and we drop into our body. So there's lots of kind of guided processes that do support women to get curious about, usually all I can feel is aches and pains and there's heaviness and whatever. But the way that I teach and guide is like, oh, there's this little pocket of warmth that I've found just in my right hip, and this is as simple as it might be. And when we really come into contact with that, we can begin to expand that and move that. And it might sound a bit kind of woo-woo, but actually it's very much anatomically even, I like to have a grasp on anatomy so we can like really allow the body to feel supported. So we do lots of those processes. I also like working a lot with, so I do lots of kind of embodied imagining and visioning journeys, lots of creative expression. So, I mean, I'm really deep. I love accessing the creative feminine and having that lead. So there's some writing, there's different invitations into expression personally, or it can be witnessed and received. So yeah, it's not like we're sitting in a circle talking about our losses, and I think that is kind of the traditional maybe way. And of course there are opportunities to do that and shame-free, safe space in which to do that. But I want women to remember who they are. I want women to come home to themselves and the fullness of who they are. And so that's really the emphasis in this way.
all when we learn how to connect with our body in this way, I mean, what an amazing, we look at mental health. We are literally in a bit of a mental health crisis.
Yes.
And, what a fabulous tool, even moving beyond grief.
Yes.
Other aspects of your life when you learn that inner resourcing.
That's right.
My husband and I made a $10,000 decision the other day based on what our bodies told us.
Yeah. I mean, I wouldn't make a single decision if my body was saying hell no. No, that's a no.
It's really interesting how much your body, it's such the value in just having the courage to, and I love it that you do it in a circle, because sometimes for people that are like deep in their grief, maybe being held in a circle is also really truly what they need.
That's right. And they're always quite intimate as well. I only, I'm not kind of about having these like circles of 50. Like for me, it is about the intimacy. And I mean, that's again the safety factor, right? And having this opportunity to just not get lost in the crowd. And it is an online program, this one, but I do run live workshops and things like that in person, as well. But I do find that the online space can still be deeply supportive. And for some, it actually is really nice, because it's like a kind of they don't have to go and be extra courageous. They don't even have to have their camera on if they don't want to.
Yeah.
They don't even have to rock up. It'll be recorded. But yeah, it's I think it's that permission piece to just like, you choose what feels good for you, and then the invitations are just there. And yeah,
it really allows you to explore it, and and just grow through the process. And so I one thing I was reading on your website was that you are quite passionate about the collective grief of women, like ancestral type grief of women. So tell us a little bit about, or perhaps like in the work that you do, how do you see that show up for women? I suppose it could be quite varied, but is there any common themes?
Oh yeah, great question. A few answers to that. I would say that, coming back to what you mentioned before, it's like when we actually come back into relationship to our felt experience, to our internal and external senses, our intuition, our instinct, all of those things, we actually begin to detangle a little bit in terms of particularly grief, to understand what is ours and what is not ours. And what I mean by that is, sometimes, particularly if you're a sensitive, I imagine in your community, there's a lot of highly sensitive people and empathic people who, and as somebody who relates to that, it's sometimes I can feel a sense of, like, that term, like carrying the world on our shoulders, right? And that's a very real thing. So I wholeheartedly believe that we carry the blueprints of the grief of our lineage in our DNA, and so even if we suffer an enormous loss, sometimes that almost opens the floodgates. I know it certainly did for me, to really look at other areas of my life, in my relationships, in the way I was showing up in my work, or my fears around being visible or vulnerable, or all of these things. And when I really allowed my body to speak to me around that, and to really discern, like, where did that come from? I could see so many patterns, right? My mother's mother, down the line. And so that kind of ancestral grief and collective grief, like, these are layers that we all are plugged into in one way or another, but some of us very much feel it and others not so much. And so I think it's very important to create space for that. And a lot of the themes, particularly for women, that are just so prevalent, are these grief wounds around safety, feeling right. I mean, physically feeling safe, but also feeling safe to live a fully expressed life outside of the rules of what it is to be, lots of good girl conditioning.
Straight away I just think of the limitations around pleasure, just based on.
Absolutely.
I mean, I grew up a good Catholic schoolgirl.
Yeah.
Not meaning anything to Catholics, but just there is definitely a program around that,
There is, absolutely. And even if you didn't necessarily explicitly go to a Catholic school, living in Western patriarchal, not even just Western, but patriarchal capitalist culture, it is, and like, we have been indoctrinated into this kind of purity culture around what is okay and not okay for women to, and how are we allowed to show up in our fullness. And so for many, many women, we have never seen or had modeled to us women who feel at home in their body, women who are comfortable in their sensual expression, who love and respect their bodies, who have boundaries around their time, their energy, their bodies, who, you know, so many women, myself included, grew up with this idea that, well, to be lovable, I have to be XYZ, you know, I have to fit into this acceptable box. And so there's been tremendous grief for me in the unraveling of that, very liberating and freeing. But as I move through those layers and I really tune into my lineage, there's so much sadness there at like what has been lost. And also, I don't want that for my daughters. And so there's this grief in, like, you know, even what I've demonstrated to them as their mother so far, and like, you know, what they've absorbed when they were like, there's a lot. And I think that is, yeah, that's a big part of the work I do with women, is actually acknowledging that what you feel, you might not be able to articulate, and it feels blurry and tangled, but it's real. And it is deeply ancestral and ingrained. And once you become aware of those patterns and those cycles that have been kind of living on in you, we can do something. We can move through those. We can let them go. We can, and this is a very embodied process. This is not just like you know, a nebulous esoteric idea. It's like, no, we can actually unravel the trauma and the tension as your body is holding it. Yeah.
And like you say, it is in the DNA, so it's like definitely a part, you know, it's in the body. It's we have to sort of embrace it there.
Yeah.
I love even that idea that, like, when we're in the mother's womb, as a fetus,
Yeah,
we have the you know, the ovaries.
Yep.
And carrying,
isn't that
so
incredible?
the grandmother's already carrying the grandchild, you know, the yeah, it's just, so it
We
just
can't
goes to
escape
show.
it.
Yeah.
Yeah, we can't.
Yeah, no, it's
Yeah.
very, very fascinating.
It is.
I think that I often look at, you know, I went to a blessing way on the weekend.
Yeah.
It was beautiful, but this topic came up, you know, and just chatting with some of the other women there, and, you know, just those patterns that we adopt as mothers, you know, which has kind of come from our mother, and then, you know, some of those things we pass on like a bit unconsciously because the pattern's there and we haven't yet
Absolutely
acknowledged. But what we were saying is that, yes, so many of those patterns are kind of come from this root of this grief of something, you know, whether it was the loss of innocence, or, you know, the trauma and the loss there, or but also what was really fascinating was, as each generation comes through, just the amount of healing, I guess, that transformation that, you know, if we look at our girls today,
yes,
you know, they're really much more protected than what, you know, say my mother was as a young child. So
yeah, and I think there's this sense now we do understand that like each generation doesn't just operate in isolation, right? And so we now understand that, yes, like the more information that we have, and the more we can support particularly our daughters, but also our sons, to acknowledge the kind of loss that has happened over time. There's so much opens up, and they're the ones creating the culture. Like, we are literally creating the culture. And so I like to, I guess, really affirm that when I speak to this cultural conditioning and deconditioning that. Also, what we're doing is creating a new culture and being part of part of this way of living that honors the body, that accepts that intuition and embodied wisdom is vital. It's not less than our intellect, or, you know, and appreciating cycles and seasons of life instead of like this linear chronological way of just powering through life. We get to recreate that, and our children, the more that we can kind of do all of that unpacking and that permission giving, and giving them permission and empowering them to heal their relationship to grief as it stands, like generations before. In a few generations time, like there will be a dramatically different approach to loss, to humanity in general, to the planet, hopefully. But I mean, we've got a long way to go, but yeah, this is not just about, like, it's healing one person at a time, but for the bigger picture.
Yeah. Oh, look, it sounds amazing. I love this perspective. I really love this embodied approach, and understanding how much we really can access through our bodies.
Yeah, so much.
I think it's such an empowering topic for anyone, really, that is in a place of grief, just to know that this is available to them. And once they go there the first time and explore it, you know, that's probably a lot of the hard work, that initial hard work
just done. Showing up. That's exactly it. I will always say that the work is in getting into the room, coming into the space, is saying yes to yourself. That's the work. Once you're there and you're held, it all just, your body leads. Your body is brilliant and wise, you know, but it is just that moving through the maybe like, oh, this is vulnerable or whatever it is. And it is saying yes to you. So yeah, so true.
Wow. Oh, it just sounds fabulous. Was there anything else that you wish to share, or do you feel like we've sort of covered?
I think we've covered so much. I mean, you know, this work just kind of flows through my veins, and I am just always so in awe of the women who do say yes to this path, and the men who support the path and understand it. And it can be challenging to imagine that grief and pleasure can work together, and that we can befriend them, and we can actually find vitality via a relationship to our grief. And yet it is entirely possible, and I keep witnessing it and I keep experiencing it myself. So I just want to say, if anyone's listening who is curious, you're curious for a reason. Your body is kind of like, well, hey, there might be something in this for me, and just follow the breadcrumbs with that, you know, just let that be enough, and let your curiosity lead. And I'm always available for a chat, you know, DM me, or jump on my website, have a read, and hopefully
we'll make sure we share all your details in the post so that people can find you easily if they
thanks, Liz.
Because this is very much what this is all about, is that it's recognizing how unique we are all on this journey. And you know, by sharing all these different perspectives, it might be just something that you say that resonates.
Exactly. Yeah,
so
that's right.
I've already had a few people that I know that have had a grief process recently that I thought, oh, I think this could be good for, but we'll leave them to.
Of course, of course. And timing is a big thing as well, I think, with grief. Really honoring your own timing is important. I care a lot about, I'm not a huge fan of working with grief in phases or stages, but what I am interested in, I've just actually written a little bit about it that I'll be sharing on social media this week, but I'm interested in understanding our proximity to our grief at any one time. And I speak about that kind of in these locations of grief, how we relate to them in our, how they feel in our bodies as we move into these different proximities. And so it's like the space of anticipatory grief when things, and I call that the spell of grief, when that's something's happened, there's been a diagnosis, there's been someone's leaving the relationship, whatever. It's like the antagonist of grief. And then that's a space in itself. Then there's the storm, you know, the absolute holy dooly. I'm just in the absolute storm of grief. It's happening around me. I don't know how to get out of it. And then I call it the grief quake. The quake is the next location in which we feel like the grief is still rippling through our lives in different ways, but we're a little steadier, but we're still kind of, those tremors are happening all the time. And so that feels different in our bodies, our nervous system as well. And then there's also the grief echo. It's like that space that maybe it happens down the track. Sometimes we cycle through them, but the echo is kind of like, it's always there. We can always, it's like rolling thunder, you know, in the distance. We feel the grief, we're carrying it, but it's just not as heavy. It's not as loud, it's not as intense. It's just that echo that's always reminding us and also kind of showing us the way. So that might sound a little bit kind of obscure and a little poetic, and I like to work in that way, but it interests me to learn where you feel you are in, you know, as a location. And know that you don't need to be moving neatly through. You might be going do back, and that's okay. But knowing where your body is in that time and how you can support your body and source your body and your heart can be really powerful. So wherever you're at, honoring that and looking for support that can meet you there is my invitation.
I love that. I love those different descriptions. I think they're very fitting. The quake one made me think also of, and I don't know whether this is like kind of relates to how you sort of put that language around it, but I started thinking about an earthquake sort of splitting into two, and so we sort of have this it's almost like that like we have the loss and the pain of grief on the one side, but then maybe also this, can I go there? Can I have the hope or the
I think that's beautiful. And also, like, you know, on one side it's like the person I was before the loss, and then the person that maybe I am becoming because of it. Like I love that. So much to reconcile.
Oh, thank you so much, Kate. It's been such a pleasure to have you come on and speak with us today. I really feel very honoured that you gave us your time, and it was really awesome to hear about what it is that you offer. And we will make sure that we share that, all the details for Kate. If any of you do want to reach out to her, like she said, you could DM in the post or comment in the post or DM, but there'll also be some contact details on there.
Thank you, Liv. It's always such a pleasure. And I appreciate you reaching out and having this conversation. Thank you.
Cool. Thank you so much.